Hello there, Force of Will players! My name is Charlie DeMel, and today I'm going to be going over my top 10 cards in the new set, Game of Gods Reloaded. If you remember my video from the last time, it was a little bit long, ran a little bit over 50 minutes. I didn't really have any talking points set up, I just knew what cards I wanted to talk about. But today I've kind of written a few talking points, so hopefully I can keep this video a lot shorter, both for your viewing pleasure and my sanity. So, anyway, getting right into it, we're going to be starting off with Alice's Fantastic Trick, my card that I would put in the number 10 slot. So, Alice's Fantastic Trick is a single CMC light will, effectively destruction option. So, light has never really had a pure destruction option, something that can hit entities with as low of a CMC value as Alice's Fantastic Trick. Or at quick cast speed like it's at. The other thing with it is because it's one total cost, it can be grabbed off of Charlotte, the Inheritor of the Seventh, from the set the Seventh, right? Charlotte is just kind of like a known light toolbox option, very powerful card that we've seen in quite a few decks, even just to be able to grab whatever you want. You can grab cards that blank cards, like they lose abilities, etc., etc. And now she's added destruction to that toolbox of hers, which is a very powerful effect to add to that. The other thing with her is, even though Alice's Fantastic Trick says it has to be played as the second or subsequent spell in order to gain the destruction effect, because you play Charlotte first in order to grab Alice's Fantastic Trick, you are still able to get that targeted destruction. So it's actually a better card to play off of Charlotte than to potentially just have sitting in your hand waiting around. Now, that's not saying it's bad to just sit in your hand and waiting around. We've seen some of the cards in the new set, Game of Gods Reloaded, cost effectively 0 mana or get played for very low mana values or give you more mana, especially in Light. Light also has a bunch of draw power itself. So if I were, even though you need other cards to play with Alice's Fantastic Trick, because it is now entity destruction available to Light, one of the few things that they just didn't really have effective access to, it kind of shores up a weakness that the deck, like Mono White Lumion Wanderer or Alice coming out of Game of Gods Reloaded, things like that, kind of suffered from and had to splash into other colors in order to really have an effective time to deal with entities. So that is why it gets my number 10 slot. Coming in at number 9. Number 9 is going to be Dante Enters the Game of Gods. If you watched my last video from just the Game of Gods top 10, my number 1 card in there was Keep the Faith. Keep the Faith was like a modal card, gave +4/+4 drain, some other stuff, or you could like resurrect a 1-drop from your grave at quick cast speed for a single light mana. Dante Enters is a single black or darkness will, and it is effectively a draw 3, right? So it's quick cast, 1 will, draw 3. You still pay 1500 life, but life is never really relevant until like you're about to die, right? So like I could still be at 100 life for the entirety of a game, but if my opponent can't put any pressure on that life, or I have answers to keep dealing with all their stuff, it just became another resource for me to abuse. And Dante Enters the Game of Gods fills that slot very well. It is very reminiscent of a card called Whispers from the Abyss. Whispers from the Abyss is a very old card, but it works functionally the same in that every 500 increments of life you pay, you draw 1 card. Dante just has a cap to it. The other thing about Dante Enters the Game of Gods is it also has its first modal effect, which is very similar to the one on Keep the Faith, +4/+4, and then it just gives more keywords. I believe it gives all the same keywords that Keep the Faith does, and 2 more. I believe it also gives Pierce and because it gives Flying Drain, which Keep the Faith also does, and then it gives Pierce and 1 other, maybe Precision or something like that. They're not incredibly relevant keywords, however, more keywords is always like nice to have, right? So because of its modability, as well as it functioning in Dante as being able to give that mode and work as like a draw, right? You can give a Resonator you control drain and a power boost, and then draw, and then attack your opponent. You gain all the life back you just paid, right? It's just a bunch of value in a single card that can also be played at instant speed, which is the most relevant part. A lot of the draw cards that we tend to say aren't powerful or that value isn't powerful is because they don't do it at instant speed, or they don't draw enough, or they don't have other modal options, which Dante Enters the Game of Gods does. And that is why it gets my number 9 spot. Coming in at number 8. Number 8 is going to be Guinevere, the new blue Guinevere. So Guinevere, the reason I have her here in number 8, as opposed to maybe higher on the list, one of the things that I look at when I make these lists is splashability, ability to be played in other decks outside of the one they are designed for. Guinevere is really only played in Machina. Like, you don't really play Guinevere outside of Machina, even in other Tails decks or things like that. She is, all of her primary like functions and effects work because of Machina's order. So that's why she's a little bit lower. However, why she's on the list. She is the safest turn 1 play, if you have the coin, Energize, in order to make for any deck in the game, right? So if I were to energize out Guinevere and order her with Machina, no deck in the game, no Carlina, no Fieth Mouge, no anything, can actually interact with that play. Because by the time Guinevere enters play, she's already a machine, and she'll already have her continuous effect to make your opponent play more, or pay more in order to play cards, and activated effects already established, which means any activated effects from hand, like Angel of Fallen Tears, Fallen Angel of Black Tears, something like that, Violet effects, anything like that, it stops all those activate effects, and it stops all spells. So your opponent cannot produce enough mana unless they somehow ramped a bunch of mana on the first turn of the game through maybe interaction you might have had or anything like that. So they can't actually do anything to Guinevere, which means you'll always get her enter effect off. So you'll always get whatever the top card of your deck is, as long as it meets her requirements, right? So she goes kind of neutral on value. She just gives you more value or tempo. And then she's uninteractable. The other thing about it is if your opponent does not deal with her, it forces your opponent to play at sorcery speed, play on their turn. That's one of the worst possible things you can really do in Force of Will, because a lot of the time what you want to do is hold up any will into your turn in order to try and make as many plays as possible before you recover all of your mana, and then have your opponent try and deal with those plays. And then if they try and deal with them, you make a bunch of other plays in order to potentially put yourself ahead in the game. So Guinevere allows it where if she stays alive, your opponent just can't interact with you. It's just not really possible. They just can't really play cards. The mana, as long as she's ordered, the mana cost of what she would require your opponent to pay is so steep for FOW that your opponent just can't really do anything. So if she can't be killed, then you just get a free turn going into your next turn. And the other thing is, even if they can kill her, they would have to kill her on their turn, which means they don't have any real mana going into your turn, right? So you kind of just get these free, safe turn plays by having played a Guinevere, which can't be dealt with in the first place. And that's why Guinevere gets the number 8 slot, okay? Moving in at number 7. Number 7, we have the new Dark Alice. I believe the full name is Dark Alice in Ma'at. So Dark Alice has the text where she can be played as a Tails and all that if your ruler is the new Alice. Otherwise, she is a villain's card, which means she goes in the villain's decks. The cool part about Dark Alice is she's such a powerful value play, but she's valuable at sorcery speed. But what she does is she has targeted hand rips. And I don't believe we've ever had a card that has given us 2 targeted hand rips outside of Look of Corruption, which I believe the restriction on Look of Corruption is more like egregious or like harder to get full value off of than Dark Alice's is. The other thing about Dark Alice is her Regalia production. She produces a Darkness Regalia, so she kind of just gives you a free Regalia if you are playing Alice, right? Because you want regalias of different attributes, etc., etc. The other thing is that Regalia, since she gives it the ability to give stuff -6/-6, you can unlock your order with her own effect, right? So if your opponent's like, oh, I don't really care about a -6/-6 from my opponent, you're not really using her Regalia effect. Like, let's say you're playing like Odin or Loki, right? And you've ordered her. The what you're allowed to do is, if your opponent's like, oh, we can just sit with her as the order and I don't really mind it, you can kill your own Dark Alice with her Regalia -6/-6 because she is a 6/6. So not only is she going to play for positive value from hand rips, she'll go +1 in just pure value, right? Because you play one card, you get rid of 2 from your opponent's hand. She also plays to either get field tempo in the form of giving your opponent stuff -6/-6 with the Regalia she produces, or you can unlock your own order in order to continuously get more and more revolution effects on your other resonators that may want it, maybe another Dark Alice, things like that. The other thing about her enter effect, you do not need to produce the Regalia. It does not need to have to be made in order to rip the second card. So you'll always get 2 hand rips, even if you already have a Darkness Regalia in play. And that is why she comes in at number 7. Just the versatility of her, as well as the value that she produces, in addition to just being able to either provide board presence or get herself out of the way if you need to order more things. Coming in at number 6. Number 6 is going to be Tales of Fantasia. So Tales of Fantasia is, what were the colors? I believe it's light blue and black again. So light blue and black, otherwise known as Esper in Magic, I believe. It's quick cast, so 3 mana quick cast. You look at the top X cards of your deck, where X is the number of Regalia you control, put up to 1 Resonator, 1 Addition, and 1 Chant into play. Or into your hand, I think, is the first one. And then I think if you're Alice, well, I know if you're Alice, you double the amount that you search off the top, and then you can put, I know you can put the 3 options into play, the Resonator, the Chant, the Addition. So Tales of Fantasia, in Alice specifically, if your opponent has no interaction and you go second, so you're on the coin. This is in New Frontiers, by the way. We'll talk about Wanderer in a second, because this card has a lot more powerful Wanderer implications than it does New Frontiers. You can play Tales of Fantasia on turn 1 in Alice. You just have to energize out IU on your very first turn of the game, which you kind of want to be doing anyway. But anyway, Tales of Fantasia functions very similarly to a card called Awakening of the Winged Lord. Awakening of the Winged Lord was 1 lower CMC, but it also had a restriction on the cards that you can get from the top 4 of your deck. It had to be 2 CMC or lower. It had to be a permanent, and it only got 1 card, not 3. So Tales of Fantasia plays for a lot more potential value off of that. In New Frontiers, you can rip out Alice's Edition, which is a very powerful card. You can rip out like Tea Party members to recover your Regalia as like a very minor type thing. Other like large resonators that you can play. We have even been in talks with like the guys who I kind of make decks and stuff like that with. You could potentially play like Arthur, the new machine that stacks your deck and stuff like that, in order to like stack your deck with like a Rig Veda or anything, and then like Tales of Fantasia out the Rig Veda and other cards. Like there are a bunch of play lines that you can make with Tales of Fantasia. It being quick cast is nice. The biggest issue that it'll suffer from in New Frontiers is its mana cost, right? Because it is one of each different color. Light is kind of in the best spot outside of green in order to hit like 5 colors, basically, to not really have that much of an issue with 5 colors because of Amadeus, the Holy Crystal, the card that allows you to produce mana if your opponent has 2 rulers. So it kind of has the least bit of problems. Same with Alice. Alice has other ways to produce mana. So Alice is kind of fine with it. However, you can potentially get mana screwed trying to play Tales of Fantasia. Moving out of New Frontiers, so moving into Wanderer, Tales of Fantasia becomes a lot stronger, like absurdly stronger. So there are a few things that Wanderer does with Tales of Fantasia. A lot of this is going to be behind IU, which, spoiler, IU's on this list. But Tales of Fantasia allows you to play like an Excalibur in Wanderer on turn 1, like no energize. You can play an Excalibur, pitch an Excalibur, play an IU, order that IU, and then make like your Tales of Fantasia play, which means you would get a Regalia off of Alice, you have the Excalibur, that you played. So you get to look at the top 4 cards of your deck off of Tales of Fantasia, because you have 2 Regalia, right? And then you can search a card like Alice's World. Alice's World lets you take an extra turn, right? So your first turn of the game, and you're already just starting to take extra turns. You do have to kind of get a little bit lucky that Alice's World is in the top X cards of your deck, top 4 in this case. But being able to rip out additions like that, additions that allow you to take extra turns, is a very powerful, very like borderline broken type effect, right? So Tales of Fantasia's application for Wanderer is a lot more powerful than its application in New Frontiers. However, they both serve as very powerful functions of in both formats for Alice. Okay. Moving on to number 5. Number 5 is going to be Flashing Smile. So a Flashing Smile shores up. It's not that great in Alice or other real like light quick cast type decks. You might play it in Mono White Lumia in Wanderer. Its Force Resonance locked behind Alice isn't that great, just the like kind of mana reduction effect on it. However, what it is for New Frontiers is it is playable off of Lycion because it is 2 CMC. And because it's playable off Lycion, you get to play it in a deck like Feith Mouge or in like Welser combo or anything like that, which those decks typically had problems dealing with wide boards and J-Ruler removal, both of which Flashing Smile hits. The other thing about Flashing Smile, those decks tend to have a bunch of cards in their hand. They don't tend to really like spend cards, basically. They're very value neutral for the most part, so as long as you're not playing cards, they're not playing cards. But it so it functions very well as the board wipe. It hits through barrier because it's not targeted, right? It's just a board wipe, but the damage value is very high. Typically, if you have just 2 other cards in your hand, right, because it draws a card, you're going to hit the entire board for 900, which will kill most relevant things. If you have 4 in hand, you hit for 1200, which will kill through Wall of Terror, Virgil's, pretty much anything, right? So because it hits through barrier and stuff like that, it's a very powerful, very strong removal tool that those types of decks didn't have access to before. So it kind of even props them up even higher for like Feith Mouge, again, Welser combo, things like that, that use and abuse Lycion, because they get to play it for free off of Lycion. It's still a chant, and it shores up the main issue and like weakness that those types of decks had. Okay, and that is why it's my number 5 slot. Moving on to number 4. Number 4, alluded to it earlier, is going to be Ayu. So like I said before, I tend to look for splashability, generic application, things like that in order to start rating my cards. The Game of God sets has made that very hard with both, again, the application of order, tails and fill-ins, and then also Force Resonance. So I've been kind of struggling. But with Ayu, what Ayu does for Alice is so strong. It's very, very similar to what Guinevere does for Machina. So Ayu is not as safe as Guinevere. It can still be dealt with, even if you play it right. Like Guinevere just can't even be touched. Ayu can still be touched. However, what Ayu does in Alice is forces your opponent to answer her. If an Ayu sticks, it's very hard to get back into a game like that. The other thing that she'll do, if you just look at her effect face value off of playing her off of a Alice order, you're going to go will positive. You go +2 will off of playing a 1 mana card, right? Because you play a 1 mana card and you generate 3 will. You produce your Light Regalia off of Alice and you get 2 free Light Will to play. So going up that high in mana is almost equivalent to a Carlina player hitting a 6 Sage Stone. However, Alice is not stuck under the 1 card a turn restriction that Carlina is, right? So just by having Ayu, you hit a mana value that other decks in the game need a ruler that says you produce 2 free mana in order to kind of hit. So It goes super high, which allows you to kind of, you can Tales of Fantasia on turn one. It is possible in certain decks, um, or with certain like hands in Alice. The other thing with it is it goes neutral in value because Alice's flip draws you a card. So every time you order a card off of Alice, you're going to draw a card. So even though you play this IU, even if it dies in response to all of its enters and everything like that, you're going to still replace it. It'll still replace itself in card value while your opponent plays a card, right? So unless your opponent's like a Stemma, which generates value off of killing your opponent's stuff, they're not going to be generating value while you are going value neutral. So you're already winning like the card advantage game. The other thing with it, if they do respond to the IU, it makes all of your other plays for the turn free to use, right? So like the Tales of Fantasia thing that I kind of talked about, other like 1 mana like light resonators that you can play, like things like that, Tea Party members, etc., etc. So the best way to deal with the IU, by the way, is to kill her. It is not to stop any of the enters, either her 2 light will production or the Regalia production from Alice. If you stop one of those, she still gets a bunch of effective mana plays, etc., etc. If you just kill the IU, you take out the mana from the Regalia. It forces your opponent to call a stone. They don't have a resonator, and then they just have the 2 light will that will go away, or and the stone that they call, right? So it's the best way to deal with IU is to kill IU, which isn't that hard. She's only going to be a 4/4, 5/5, something like that because of Alice's buff. So it's easily killable at the start of the game. It just plays for so much mana value and so much card value that if it sticks around, you practically win the game. And even though it might not stick, you still just play it. because it's just that strong. It's so powerful that even though your opponent might be able to deal with it, can probably deal with it, has their deck built to deal with it, you still just slam it into whatever they're doing. And that is absurd for a game like Force of Will, right? Being able to play on sorcery speed and being like, yeah, this didn't matter that you had an answer to it. That's so strong. I refer to those kinds of plays as safe plays, which is very akin to what Yu-Gi-Oh does. Like, it is a safe play to play around X hand traps that exist in Yu-Gi-Oh, stuff like that. So getting to that level of gameplay where there are plays where you're like, oh yeah, this is just safe, is kind of crazy. Anyway, moving on to number 3. The card in my number 3 slot is going to be Rigveda. So Rigveda, in my opinion, and the opinion of some other people, is the most powerful card I've ever seen printed. Part of the fact of Rigveda and how powerful it is again in its modalness, I guess, is the best way to put it. Being able to cancel something for 1 will, like if you just take the card at face value, right? Cancel something for 1 will, cancel an automatic or activate ability for 1 will, destroy something for 1 will. We have had cancel something or cancel an automatic or activate for 1 will before. We have had destroy an entity for 1 will before. We have had cancel for 1 will before. However, it was a stipulation on Otherworld Dreams where you didn't actually prevent the play. Your opponent got to play something else, right? So we've technically had all 3 before, but not as like clean cut as this one is. And it has the ability to pick between all of them. So it'll always play at 1 mana, which is like the lowest mana value in the game outside of 0 mana. For 1 mana, it can deal with anything, which means it always plays mana neutral, pretty much. So it allowing you to deal with things at mana neutralness, either killing it, canceling it, stopping its effect trigger, is very strong. If you start paying mana into it, you go up to 2 mana. So maybe you're not playing mana neutral for a card, right? You get to start dealing with 2 things, which means you're still dealing with things at mana neutral, but you're dealing with more cards at a greater card advantage, right? So like, for example, if my opponent plays a card and they also have an entity in play that I want to maybe get rid of, I can play Rigveda, cancel their card, and get rid of their entity, both of which they probably paid at least 1 mana for, which means we're both playing at a mana neutral rate. However, I've played one card and I've dealt with two of yours, so I'm now playing at card positive. So that is part of why Rigveda is so powerful. It only gains that effect to have the multiple modals and cost reductions and stuff like that in Shiva, which is why it kind of has a tax on it. However, cards that are attached to a specific deck, even though that is kind of a tax and makes them inherently worse and potentially less competitively viable, doesn't change how powerful the card built is, right? That's why Rigveda's up here. Remember, I said I really like genericness, where cards are like you can play cards in other decks, so on and so forth. And Rigveda is stuck behind Shiva, which is looking to potentially not be competitively viable going into the Carta Magica tournament on March 5th and the other tournament on March 12th, the Game and Geek tournament. It's looking to be not competitively viable. However, Rigveda is still my number 3 card. So if it was, Rigveda would be like number 0. It is such an absurdly powerful card for what it does, how modal it is, and just everything for it. Again, I do believe Rigveda is the most powerful card they've ever printed, just hands down, with how generic it is, how available it is, etc., etc. The other thing with Rigveda, right, I kind of mentioned it earlier, you could potentially play it in Alice in order to function as like a counter off of Tales of Fantasia, if you stack your deck with things like Arthur and stuff like that. The other thing is Carlina Stemma has kind of been showing up as a deck. Carlina has an easy time playing Rigveda, and Rigveda, even though you might not get all 3 options, paying the 3 mana in order to get a cancel and a kill is still pretty valuable. So I believe Carlina Stemma would probably play Rigveda in some capacity, maybe as like a 2 of or something like that, but I don't believe it plays it as like a 4 of, right? So it's a little bit splashable in a deck like Carlina. However, you don't really see Rigveda going to be played outside of Shiva. Moving on to number 2. The card in my number 2 spot is going to be the Tea Party before the Decisive Duel. So Tea Party has a few things with it. One, just to get this out of the way, its second part, the this card gains part, is a continuous effect. It is not reliant on the card resolving. So even if the card is removed from the game by some type of effect, like from your grave, from your hand, etc., it will still gain its activated effect in the RFG area. A couple other rulings with it. It will always lose to Sloth, Dante's God Art from the 7th. It will always lose to that. The cards and abilities lose their text in the RFG engrave. Because it doesn't function on like resolving, etc., how the layers of continuous effects work, it will never be able to gain its effect under Sloth. So Dante kind of hard counters Tea Party. Other thing about Tea Party, if a replacement effect is in play, something like Beatrice's Imagination, that would cause a card sent to the grave to be removed from the game instead, because Tea Party would require you to put it back in the grave and it would go to the RFG, if a replacement effect is in play like that, where a card would be sent somewhere and move to the same zone it would be sent from, you cannot pay the cost. So you cannot activate Tea Party's continuous effect, or activated effect, underneath cards like Beatrice's Imagination, Barrier Seal, other things like that. So it does not go infinite with cards like those. It does have a couple quote-unquote infinites or value plays, primarily in a deck like Dark Tree, or Tree 2, or whatever you want to call it, Yggdrasil, the Malefic Verdant Tree, its actual name. Dark Tree has, not only does it have when you take damage, remove the top cards of your deck, so it just sitting out there just makes it active and makes it free. They also have access to the Rezard that is a part of that deck that can remove cards from the game by paying 200 life, and they don't take damage. So you just pay out your life in order to generate more mana, more cards with Tea Party. So it's a very valuable card in decks like that. You're just paying life to generate cards and mana, which is so powerful, right? Life is just a resource. And then in other types of decks, things like Ayu, things like Excalibur Genesis, decks that use light mana dorks like Flute or Acolyte of the Sun or things like that, decks that have fake mana that isn't always there. I call it fake because, like, floating mana, basically. You can use Tea Party to quasi bank that mana, right? So if I play Ayu and my opponent kills the Ayu and I have 2 Light Will, I can play a Tea Party off of that Light Will that's going to go away and store that mana. And now I have my stone that I called, as well as a Tea Party RFG'd in order to produce 2 mana if I need to use that, right? So Tea Party's functionality makes it so that you can go up in mana values as turns go on, and bank your floating mana if you don't plan on using it that turn, and it will just disappear. So its functionality in that it also gives Light Resonators quick cast, which, I mean, that's fucking cool too, right? So and it also doesn't play any way down, right? You lose your mana out for the turn, but then you're and the card, but you're going to draw a card and gain a mana when you activate it. Okay, so Tea Party's applicability is so powerful. It's not locked behind anything. It doesn't have force resonance. It doesn't have anything like that. Revolution, tails, etc., etc. So it's very just a neutrally good card. I would probably play it in, like, Mono White Lumia. I would definitely play it in Alice decks. I would play it in Dark Tree. I would play it in other decks that use the RFG area effectively. If you play Death Scythe in Wanderer, which Alice will because it's a Regalia, if you get 3 of these, you can, like, kind of quasi infinitely loop Death Scythe and remove those 3, right? So it functions, it's very powerful. It just has many applications and is very powerful. Okay, so, and that is why Tea Party gets my number 2 spot. Now, before we get to number 1, I'm assuming if you've looked at the set and you understand, like, generic playability, most of you will know what my number 1 is, since I haven't said it yet and I've already said Rigveda. I do want to say, for an honorable mention, I will not put rulers on my lists. I will not put them on my lists ever because they are immediately locked into you playing that ruler. However, if I think a ruler is absolutely broken, I will put it in the honorable mention so we can at least talk about it. Past examples would be something like Belial, Carlina, Feith Sing. Probably wouldn't have put Violet, but I think Violet's cool. But yeah, those would probably, Mujdart would probably be on there. So those would kind of be the types of honorable mentions. This set gets Alice. So Alice gets to go here, and I want to talk about Alice for just a quick second. There's one function of Alice that no other order ruler has. And that is the fact that every time you order a card, you draw a card. So Alice's order, every time it happens, you go value neutral, just inherently. It's very akin to how a Stemma always plays value neutral on kill spells. Alice just always plays value neutral on order, which means it's a lot more impactful for you to continuously order cards in a deck like Alice, which can play at higher mana values due to Tea Party and Ayu than other order decks can play, in order to facilitate playing on curve order cards and not suffering from having to call a stone before judgmenting your ruler or ordering your resonator or whatever. So because of that, Alice is a very, very strong card. I think she is the most powerful order ruler we've had so far. The only other one might be Machina, but that is not Machina inherently. That is the cards that he has. Alice inherently is just absurdly powerful. She is so strong. And a lot of the cards that she got feel very pushed. So that's my kind of take on Alice. Free card advantage is a very, very powerful effect. Okay. And so that's why I wanted to talk about Alice in my honorable mentions real quick. All right, coming in at number 1, saving the best for last. If you aren't already aware what it is, I'm sure you all have your guesses. It's setting the stage for Providence. So setting the stage for Providence, a single blue CMC. Spells and abilities you control cannot be targeted by spells and abilities. Draw a card. That is just the top text. That text is playable in any combo deck. Any combo deck that has ever existed plays for setting the stage for Providence. Why? It replaces itself, and it prevents all your stuff from being countered or dealt with. Stuff just has to be killed, which means your enters and your spells are always going to resolve, which is why it is broken for combo decks. It cantripping is even more insane, because it just means you pay a single mana to make your stuff uninteractable. Now then, it also works retroactively. So if your opponent, like, let's say you play some stuff and your opponent like Rig Vedas, or you get into like some kind of like quasi cancel war or anything like that, if you play setting the stage, it prevents everything from being canceled that's even on the chase currently. Okay, so setting the stage can just function as a this cancel war is over, I win. It's an I win button, and it functions as an I win button for the rest of the turn. It's very similar to something like Law of Silence, like Dance of Spirits, like Atomic Turbulence, cards that prevent your opponent from playing. It doesn't give your board barrier. Winds of Asgard does that, but so your opponent has to deal with things that have already been played, but everything that you play cannot be dealt with anymore. Which is a very similar theme to what Machina is kind of already doing, right? Other cards make your opponent pay more in order to do stuff on your turn. Setting the stage for Providence just makes it so that whatever turn you play it on, none of your stuff is being dealt with. Whether it's your opponent's turn and you need to cancel their stuff, or it's your turn and you're trying to combo off. Machina might be very, very strong. The other thing about setting the stage for Providence, in Machina specifically, players can't chase to it, which means that whole cancel war thing that I said, where you just play it at the end and you win, Machina gets to do that 100% of the time. Whenever you cast a setting the stage of Providence within like a cancel war or an interaction war on the chase, you'll always win. That's just how the card works. It's just a I win button. And because it just can't be chased. The only con with setting the stage for Providence is the fact that you also cannot target your own effects. So the only case this would come up is if you have a negative automatic trigger that occurred for some reason that you needed to try and cancel. But the only ruler that there are only 2 cards in the game that can cancel your own automatic triggers. One of those is Rig Veda, the other one is Kaguya 3.0. Or the one from the Moonlit Savior. I think her name might just be Kaguya the Moonlit Savior in that set too. So those are the only 2 cards in the game that can cancel your own automatic abilities. For cards like Door of Time that say you lose the game, Satan, you lose the game, etc., stuff like that. So if setting the stage with Providence was activated, you yourself cannot target those to stop them. But that seems like a very niche situation that is probably never going to happen. So in all other scenarios, setting the stage for Providence, just in the most TLDR way I can say it, gives the chase barrier. That is just what it does. And it makes combo decks playable. With how Machina was looking, we didn't know if it was going to be usable as the like Lab Maniac, mill your deck out, T-Door, combo win, take extra turns thing that it is. But with setting the stage, it means that you can play a setting the stage and play a turn where you play out 3 T-Doors gimmicks or a Guinevere that's ordered and like other stuff like that. So like you order a Guinevere, your opponent suddenly has to pay 3 more to even try and interact with your board. You setting the stage, your opponent can no longer act with the chase, and then you kind of lock your opponent out from doing any form of interaction with you whatsoever as you play T-Door, take extra turns, mill yourself out, draw, and win the game. So it just enables so much like degenerate combo plays that it's just such a strong card. It is such a strong card. Welser combo plays it. I mean, Feith Mouge might even play it. It is very powerful. Very powerful. Okay. And that is why it gets the #1 spot. So that brings us to the end of the list. Those are my top 10. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Please look forward in the next couple days. I'll be putting out a tier list as well. And then maybe a deck list or two before we get started with the tournaments coming up in the next week here. Thank you so much. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in.